Good afternoon again, everybody. Thank you, Lord, all for coming in and joining us today in this webinar, Understanding Credit Reports and Scores. I'm your moderator today, Otis Mushanga. I'm the Manager of Programs and Services here at Access Community Capital Fund. Before we continue, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items, and then we will talk a little bit about who we are as an organization, and then I will introduce our presenter today, who will walk us through this great and important topic, which is oversubscribed and is always, a topical one for people in terms of wanting to understand all the nitty-gritties about credit reports and scores. So all participants will be muted during this session, just to make sure that we have optimal sound quality. And this webinar is being recorded, and a copy of this recording will be posted on our website, and we will let you know once that is available. You will see, for those of you who are new to Zoom, there is a menu bar at the bottom of your screen, and you will be able to chat with us through that menu bar. And there's also a Q&A chat box where you can pose your questions as we go along. We will be going through the presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. Due to the nature of this topic and a lot of questions that tend to come up, we may go slightly over time at the 3 o'clock. So if you still have a question and you're not rushing elsewhere, Julie will be staying on a little bit to answer all the questions that she can as much as possible. So don't feel like you need to log off right at 3 o'clock. So please do stay tuned in. And for any other issues, any other tech-related issues and general questions, just use the general chat box instead of the Q&A. So in the Q&A, please post your questions there. So let's get started. For those of you who are new to Access Community Capital Fund, who have not yet heard about us, we are a registered charity based in Toronto, and we give people who face financial barriers in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area the opportunity to reach their potential by facilitating microloans to help them achieve financial security through sustainable employment and self-employment. So a number of financial barriers that we focus on include no access to credit, or not having the good credit history that is required for anyone to get a loan to help them advance in their business or start their business, or in their career in this case. So we tend to see a lot of people, our clients having, who are new to Canada, not having that established credit history here. So that becomes a barrier for them if they want to get a loan to start a business or to start their careers here by paying for those career-related expenses. Or if you've been here a long time, or you were born here, you know that how important having good credit is. So, and a lot of people don't have that. So it means that it becomes a barrier for them to achieve their dreams of starting a small business or advancing in their careers. So we are here to assist in that respect, to ensure that everybody has equal opportunities in terms of access to financing to help them achieve those dreams. So we do have our small business loans program, which is for those who are starting a small business or who are expanding an existing one, who lack access to the capital they need to start the business. So we facilitate low interest loans of up to $5,000 to start for first-time applicants. And for those who end up getting a loan and pay it off in good standing and need additional funding to expand their business, they can apply for up to $10,000 that second time. And we also provide supports around business coaching to ensure that the client succeeds in their business. And so that's in addition to the funding. So we're not just only providing the funding, but also the supports around it. Then we do have our foreign credential recognition loans program, which is for newcomers or for new immigrants who have been here, who have come here to start their new life and are looking to restart their career or relaunch their careers here in Canada, whether it's in the same profession that they were in outside of Canada, or they're looking to start a new career. And that means that they will need to pay for career-related expenses such as tuition, certification, licensure. So we do facilitate loans up to $15,000 that allows them to achieve their career goals by paying for the certification and the licensure they need in order to be able to get started and to advance in their careers. We also provide financial coaching to all our clients, which includes helping them understand what credit is about and how they can establish it and keep it in good standing. And we also have our program for women who are interested in starting a business here, but are not quite sure about what the basics are. So this Women's Business Accelerator program helps them and equips them with the skills and the tools that they need to succeed in starting a business or expanding an existing one. And this is a workshop series that is over 6 to 7 weeks long that is facilitated by professionals. And we do have one-to-one coaching that we provide along with that, so that the participants can get that one-to-one support in putting together their business plan. And at the end, we do have a pitch contest that to present their plans and for our upcoming cohort, which will be starting in July. And if you're interested in this, keep your eyes and ears open. We are anticipating that we'll start it on July 20th. And if you're interested in joining, you can contact us and we'll be able to provide more information about it. So we do work with, and we do get funding from with Alterna Savings, is our financial partner in terms of our loans dispersal. We don't facilitate those ourselves, so they do the dispersal of loans in partnership with us. And we do get support from the Government of Canada in terms of helping us with the funding to provide the loans for foreign credential recognition, and as well as our Women's Business Accelerator program. So connect with us and on various channels, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and our website as well. So that's a bit about us. And if you have any questions, do feel free to contact us at any time. Now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our presenter today, Julie Kuzmic, who is the Director of Consumer Advocacy at Equifax Canada, and she will be walking us through her presentation. Julie is a recognized authority on consumer credit. She has served as an expert witness on credit scores in provincial court. She often speaks to industry groups, government, clients, and consumers to shed light on the credit life cycle. In her role leading consumer advocacy within the organization, Julie helps Canadians build credit confidence. She is often recognized for her ability to convey the complexities of credit scores while engaging her audience. Julie's live media appearances include BNN Bloomberg TV, as well as several radio and podcast interviews across Canada. She has written popular articles on credit for Money Sense and has been quoted in many print and online media outlets, including the Globe and Mail, Huffington Post, Bloomberg News, Financial Post, CBC, and Nas City. So without further ado, with that rich resume, hand it over to Julie to walk us through the rest of the presentation.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now hear you.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Otis. I'm so thrilled to be here today. I'll first just check that you can see my screen. Can you see the presentation okay?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone for joining us here today. I'm especially excited to be here with Access. I really And so excited is when I get to talk to people who are relatively new to Canada. I just have so much respect for how hard it is to start fresh in a new country. And for those of you who have been here for just a few months or whether it's been a few years, either way, I'm just so thrilled that you're here with us today and here in Canada. So let's dive into understanding more about credit reports and credit scores. So first of all, just a quick reminder about what we're even talking about when we talk about credit. Basically, it's getting something before you pay for it. So whether that is a credit card, where you use the credit card in a store and you don't have to pay for the amount that you charged on the card until the end of the month when you get a statement, or maybe it's a car loan where you get the car and you pay for that car over time through monthly payments, for example. That would be called an installment loan. There are also loans that are called revolving loans, and that is like a credit card example or a line of credit where the amount of the loan can go up and down. When you charge $10 on your credit card, then you are currently being loaned $10 by, say, Visa, if they're the ones who issued the credit card. Once you add another $10, now you're being loaned a total of $20. If you get a car loan, for example, so say you get a car loan for $5,000, the amount of that is just going to go down over time. You can't increase the amount of that car loan the way that you could increase the amount that you owe on your credit card. So that's the difference with an installment loan versus a revolving loan. Revolving, the amount that you owe, the balance, can go up and down. And with installment, you start owing a certain amount, and then over time, you bring it down every month or every 2 weeks, whatever your time period is, as you make your payments. And the last one here is service credit. So this would be often like a cell phone where you have a pay after plan, where you use the phone for a month and then they send you a bill and you pay for it afterwards. That would be considered a form of credit as well. So quick overview of how this works in Canada, what is actually happening when people are using credit. So we've got an individual on the left side here that's a consumer, could be you or me. In this example, this person has 4 credit accounts. They've got a credit card, we'll call that, say it's a MasterCard. They've got a cell phone. This would be a pay after cell phone, so it could be from somebody like Rogers or TELUS or any of the cell phone providers. This person has a car loan as well, could be from a bank, maybe it's from the car manufacturer directly. And then lastly, they have a mortgage or a home loan. So there are 4 different accounts that this individual has related to credit. And the buildings in the middle that you see, those are the companies that have given him this credit. So obviously you don't get your credit card necessarily from the same organization that you get your car loan from or your cell phone. So there are different organizations, different companies out there which are lending to people. And what they do, so these are called the credit grantors or the lenders. Every month after they send you your bill, they send the information about your account to 2 major credit bureaus in Canada. One of them is Equifax, that's who I work with, and the other one is called TransUnion. So at both Equifax and TransUnion, most people would have what we call a credit file. And what is happening is over time, as this individual is using these 4 accounts, on a monthly basis, the information about these accounts is getting sent to both Equifax and TransUnion, and is being added to this person's credit file. So let's take a look in a little more detail at what is on a credit file. So we often use these terms and they mean the same thing, whether it's a credit file, a credit history, a credit report. Those are all the same thing, and it refers to the credit-related information that a credit bureau like Equifax has about an individual. It's different from a credit score, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. That's why the other half of the screen is still blank. Right now, I'd like to walk through what the main elements of information are that we have on credit files. So we've got the first section is identification information. So this is what allows us to make sure that we're finding the right person's credit file. So when that information comes in on a monthly basis, so let's say it's that MasterCard bill, the information about that account is coming into Equifax, we're using that identification information on the credit report or on the credit file in order to make sure we're finding the right person to put this new account information onto their credit file. The same way or the same technique is used when you go and apply for credit. So if you go to, let's say, a bank and you're applying for a new Visa card, a new credit card, they're most likely going to ask you for your permission to access your credit file or your credit history. The other word that we use for this is consent, which basically means that you are allowing them, you are agreeing to them accessing your information. This is your private information, and nobody is allowed to access this without your permission. That's a really important step in the credit application process. So when you go and ask, I would like to have this new MasterCard credit card, please, they will say, okay, we need some information from you. We need you to consent or to agree to us checking your credit history. And one of the requirements that we have as a credit bureau is we have to record every time somebody's credit history is accessed, because we all have a right to know when people are looking up information about us. And this should only be happening with our consent or with our permission, but still, I have a right to go and look at my own credit report, which we can all do for free. I'll talk more about that a little bit later, and see who has been looking at the information. I should recognize all the people or the companies that are listed there, because they should all be companies that I have given my permission to when I was applying for a loan, for example, but I have a right to see that. So the next section here is it is a log, or it is a record of all the times that a credit file has been accessed. And the term we use for that is inquiry. So we are recording every time there is an inquiry on somebody's credit file. There are two categories of inquiries, and they are called hard inquiries or soft inquiries. The main difference is hard inquiries are involved when you're actually applying for credit. So that example of going into a bank or lender and applying for a new MasterCard, when I give them my permission to check my credit file, that will now be recorded on my credit file as a hard inquiry because I was applying for credit. But if I am applying for a new rental apartment, some of the landlords are asking for permission to check credit files, to check credit histories. That is one of the what they call permissible purposes. So that is allowed. They do have the right to check credit histories as long as they have the permission of the individual. That would count as a soft inquiry because that individual is not applying for credit, they're applying for somewhere to live. So other examples of soft inquiries would be when you go and get a copy of your own credit file, which, as I mentioned, you have the right to do. We all have the right to see what is recorded about us on our credit file. That has to be logged on the file. That is an access of the credit file. It just happens that it was me accessing my own credit file. That wasn't related to me applying for credit, so that is a soft inquiry. That would be listed in the soft inquiries section. The soft inquiries are only visible to the person whose credit file it is. So when I get a copy of my own credit file, I'm going to see hard inquiries and then soft inquiries. But when I walk into a bank and I apply for a loan and I give them my permission to access my credit file, they will only see the hard inquiries. They don't see the soft inquiries. The other thing to know about hard inquiries is that they can impact a credit score calculation. That means they can make a change in the number of your credit score, but it's not a guarantee that it will make a change. And we'll go into a little more detail on that shortly. I know there's a lot of questions around that one. Then we've got the public records section. This typically has negative information. So if you have an account that is overdue. So you've been receiving the bill or not receiving the bill, but you haven't been paying your account. Once it gets late enough, so let's say you're 30 days late, you haven't made your payment. Now you're 60 days late, you haven't made your payment. Let's say that it's for a cell phone. So let's say you've got a cell phone plan with Rogers. Now you're 90 days late and you haven't made your payment. What Rogers might do is put your account in a status which is called collections. And that indicates that you are very, very late on this payment. And this will get recorded in the public records section of your credit file. And it stays there for 6 years. Same thing with a declaration of bankruptcy. So anybody who has had to declare bankruptcy within the past 6 years, that would be on the credit file as well, in the public records section. And the last piece in public records is legal judgments. So these are legal judgments. So this is when something has happened in a court of law that is related to your finances. So an example would be if you owe taxes to the Canada Revenue Authority. So federal taxes, if you haven't paid for several years, they might take you to court and you would see that judgment appearing here on the public records. Another one that we see would be related to child support payments. If somebody is supposed to be making child support payments and they are not making them as they are obligated to, then this information could appear in the public record section on their credit file. The last section is what we call trade information. And this is where the information about your day-to-day credit accounts, that's where that sits. So this is what most people actually think of when they think of a credit report or a credit file. This is where on a monthly basis on each of your accounts, they are reporting how much you currently owe, that would be your current balance, what the credit limit is, if it's a credit card. So maybe you have a credit card that has a $1,000 credit limit, but you currently owe $200 on it. So your balance would be $200, your credit limit would be $1,000. The rating is an indication of whether you're paid up to date or whether you're 30 days late, 60 days late, 90 days late, and so on. We'll see another image about that in a minute. And then the date that this information was reported. So this is different from a credit score, which is just a 3-digit number that is a calculation based on the information that is in the credit file at the time the score is calculated. So credit scores change all the time because every day new information is being reported to the credit bureaus. And notice that we're not storing your credit score on your credit file. That information isn't there. They're only calculated when they're needed. So here's an example of the credit rating. You would have one credit rating for each one of the accounts on your file, because maybe you're 30 days late on one account, but you're up to date and paid on another account. So in the example we saw on the slide before, where the individual had the 4 separate accounts, the credit card, the cell phone, the car loan, and the mortgage, that would result in 4 different accounts in this trade information section, and each one of them would have their own rating, as you can see this example here. So a little more information about credit scores. These are some of the ways that I've heard credit scores get described. Sometimes people call a credit score an evaluation of your past financial performance. That's not quite right. It's not what it is. A credit score is actually meant to predict something. It's not meant to predict the ability of somebody to pay their bills, because their ability to pay their bills depends on things like whether or not they're employed, whether they have an income and how much that income is, whether they have, how much money they have in the bank and how much money they have in general. And you'll notice that we didn't see any of those pieces of information on the credit file. So a credit bureau cannot make a prediction of an individual's ability to pay because we don't know what your income is and how much money you have. So that's not quite right either. What a credit score actually is a prediction of the likelihood that somebody is going to pay their bills. So they were originally designed for the people at the banks and the lenders who measure risk. So when somebody submits an application for new credit, whether it's a car loan or a credit card, people at the bank would look at that application and say, well, how risky is this person? How likely am I to get my money back? Which is actually a fair question to ask, because if somebody came to me asking me to borrow some money, that's something I would want to know. Like, are you planning to pay it back or not? Because I'm not in a position, I don't have endless money to just keep loaning out to anybody who asks. So that's the idea behind credit scores. It's important to know that there are actually many different credit scores out there. A lot of people don't understand this. We often talk about my credit score as if I only had one. But I actually have multiple credit scores, and so does everybody else, because there are different ones that are used by different lenders. Not all banks use the same credit score. So I may not know it because they often don't share their credit score that they see for me. They won't share it with me a lot of the time when I'm applying for credit. But if I walked into, let's say I go to a TD bank on the street and I apply for a credit card there, they'll probably ask my consent to check my credit file, get a credit score for me, and they might see that score on the screen. Let's use one of these examples. They might see a 725. So remember that this number is between 300 and 900. 725 is actually a pretty good score. If I then walk across the street into a Bank of Montreal branch and I do the same thing, I apply for another credit card there, likely the same thing will happen. They'll say, well, do you give us permission to check your credit history so that we can decide whether or not we're going to give you this credit card? I'll say yes. They'll see a score on their screen. It's probably not the same number that the people at TD across the street saw, but I can't tell that. And they actually can't tell that either. They might see the 705. They might see 705 at Bank of Montreal, but TD maybe saw 725. This is very common. And I want you to be aware of this because there are a lot of places where you can get access to a credit score for free. And that's not a bad thing. It's good to get a sense of how a lender might see you. But it's important to know that it's not necessarily the same score the lender is going to see. So don't put so much faith into this one number that if you can get it to go three digits up, or if you see it go down by a few points, that doesn't necessarily mean that the same thing is happening on all of your credit score versions. I know it's complicated. I'm going to walk through a very high-level view of what actually goes into a credit score calculation. So I've already told you that there's more than one credit score out there. And these calculations or algorithms, they're pretty complicated. There are a lot of factors that go into the credit score calculation. So this is a high-level view that's pretty much true no matter which credit score that you're talking about. I talked about how the point of a credit score is to predict the likelihood that somebody is going to pay their bills on time. Well, it turns out that the most accurate predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So that's why your payment history or your past payment behavior is the most predictive element in your credit file. It counts for the most in a credit score calculation. The next highest element of the credit score calculation, the next highest weight in the calculation, is what we call utilization. This is the difference between the balance and the credit limit on an account. So I gave that example earlier. If you have a Visa card that has a $1,000 credit limit and you currently have a balance of $500, so you've charged $500 onto the card, whether it was one time payment or one charge of $500, or maybe you went to the drugstore several times and it was $10 here and $30 there and it's added up to $500. Either way, you currently have a balance of 500, your credit limit is 1,000, that means you're at a 50% utilization. You're using half of your available credit limit. There isn't a perfect number to aim for here. It's generally better to be at a lower utilization. So it's better if you can keep it at 50% or less, but it's okay if you can't. It's not going to ruin your credit score if you're using more of your available credit. It's just something to be aware of. And I should point out, it's not going to ruin your credit score if you're making your payments on time and you're using a lot of your available credit. If you're not making your payments on time, or there are other negative behaviors that are visible in your credit file, then having a high utilization, having a balance that is close to the available or the credit limit might have a pretty negative effect. So it's important to know that each one of these factors gets looked at in conjunction with the other information that is on your credit report at the time the score is calculated. The next one is the age of credit file and accounts. This counts for about 15% of the overall calculation. So this does mean that somebody who has had a credit file open in Canada for a longer period of time might get a higher credit score in conjunction with other good payment behavior. The good news here is that there's no action that you have to take here to increase this besides just continuing to exist. So every day your credit file is aging by another day. So you're automatically getting the benefit of the amount of time that your credit file has been open in Canada, and same thing with the credit accounts. The next two are the smallest components of the overall calculation. One of them is the type of credit accounts. So whether you only have credit cards or whether you have credit cards plus an installment loan, so maybe a car loan or a cell phone or different types of credit. And the last one is the hard inquiries that we talked about. So this is the evidence that you have been applying for new credit. It's not necessarily a bad thing to apply for new credit. You don't automatically lose points on your credit scores when you apply for new credit. In general, people who have had a longer, more solid credit history, so a good payment history on their credit file, it's a little bit like being in a larger boat on a choppy lake. So you could apply for more credit, you could have more wind come onto the water, and your boat is going to be a little more solid. So it probably isn't going to affect your credit scores as much as if you are relatively new to Canada, you have just started some new credit accounts, you've just gotten your first credit card. When you apply for credit then, it's a little bit like being in a smaller boat where it's going to take a bit less of a wave to make the boat wobble a little bit. I don't want you to be scared of applying for new credit. If you need new credit, it's okay to apply for new credit. Just know that the credit system is built on demonstration of good credit behavior over time, of responsible use of credit. So that's the main thing that you want to aim for. So this information, by the way, is all on the Equifax website and in a number of other places. So you can read more about each of these elements and what they represent. This is often where people start to feel a little bit panicky and feel like, I thought you were going to explain how scores work, and now you're just giving me confusing information and telling me that there's no way to increase my score. So this is what the big secret is. And I'm afraid it's not all that exciting. But you can see here, the most important factor in a credit score is whether you've made your payments on time. That is the most important thing to do. If you remember that credit scores are meant to identify whether somebody is a good, responsible user of credit, whether they're a good risk and they're likely to pay it back, that's the type of behavior that you need to demonstrate to show that you are a good risk. And that's what will make the credit score go up, and that's what will help a higher credit score go up. I also want to point out that there's a huge range of credit scores. As we mentioned before, it's between 300 and 900. Anything above a 750 is considered an excellent credit score. So it doesn't matter if somebody has a 780 and somebody else has a 760, they're considered the same by a lender or a bank. That 780 is not considered to be better than the 760. Once you're in that category, you're in the best category, and it doesn't matter what the actual number is. And the same is true of the categories below that. So if you see that you have a credit score of, say, 600, that can feel really awful. Like 600 out of 900? What am I doing wrong? And the answer might be nothing. Maybe you've had a late payment in there, and maybe it's taking a bit of time for that to wear off, but it will over time. But even if you don't have anything negative, it can still take some time to build up to an excellent credit score. So don't be discouraged if you feel like you're doing everything right, but you don't feel like the score is high enough. And remember what high enough is. 750 is considered excellent, and anything above that is just icing on the cake. So I want to keep moving on because I want to make sure we leave a bit of time for questions at the end, and every one of these things is a topic we could talk all afternoon about. So this slide shows you how long each of the different types of data on a credit file can affect a credit score. There are rules that are meant to protect consumers. It's meant to protect us so that if you have something negative happen, whether it's late payments or you have to declare bankruptcy at some point or an item that goes into collections, the whole idea is that that shouldn't follow you around for the rest of your life. It follows you around for a little bit. So you can see that 6 years is how long something in collections will stay on a credit file, or bankruptcy will stay on between 6 and 7 years for a first bankruptcy. So it will affect your ability to get credit for a while, but then it goes off the credit file and it's not there anymore. So it can't affect somebody's decision to lend you money. I won't go through each one of these in detail. There is more information about this online as well. I'd like to touch on the deferred payments that you may have seen that a lot of banks and lenders are offering as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic that we're currently in. We often see a lot of questions around this, so I just want to explain a bit about how these get handled when it comes to being reported to the credit bureaus and any impact on your credit score. So I'm going to give you a quick teaser. They shouldn't impact your credit score. They should not bring credit scores down. But first, let me talk about what deferred payments even are. So these are examples from, the top one is from CIBC's website. The one closer to the bottom is from the Bank of Montreal. These are just a couple of examples where people make their payments. A lot of what they're offering is what they call a deferral. And I'm seeing a message about my connection. I just want to check that you can still hear me okay. Otis, if it's possible for you to just give me a thumbs up or let me know that it's still okay.
Yes.
Okay. Give me a signal, like if it's not okay, and we'll figure out what we need to do. All right, so the deferred payments. What that means, deferral means delaying something. So it means that you may have had a payment for a credit card. What some credit card issuers are doing is allowing people to not make a payment for 1 month or 2 months or 3 months, or maybe they're lowering the interest. A lot of mortgages, there's been a lot of media coverage about this, where mortgages and other loans are allowing deferred payments. So I'm going to give you a view of what that looks like with how this information gets reported to both Equifax and TransUnion, to the credit bureaus in Canada. So this is a simplified view of what the data looks like coming into us on a monthly basis. So as an example, this could be, let's see, which bank have I not yet picked on? I don't think I've mentioned RBC. So let's use them as an example, Royal Bank. So this could be the RBC file that contains the information about all of their Visa card holders. So everybody who has a Visa account with RBC, that account would be listed in this file. And some accounts are paid as agreed, they're up to date. Some accounts are currently late, or they maybe have a missed payment. And then there would be now this new category of accounts, which is deferred. So the person has asked the lender, you have to ask, you can't assume that you're going to get this permission. So you do need to get the lender's approval. They have agreed that for this account, so in this example, person B, person C, and person H, the ones that you see in blue, these are the accounts that have been deferred. And so they would be reported to us with special information so that we know these accounts have been deferred. And the reason that we want to make sure that we know this is to protect this person's credit scores. We want to protect their credit rating by making sure that the information that is added to their credit report or their credit file is accurate according to the deferral. So I'm going to walk through a simple scenario here. And if it gets a bit challenging to follow, don't worry, it's just an example. In this example, the borrower owes $1,000 a month. So they're making $1,000 a month payment. That is what their standard agreement is with the lender. They were in good standing, so they were up to date prior to the pandemic, and they called their lender and said, I need help, I've lost my job, or my income has really decreased, I'm not going to be able to make these payments. So the lender has said, okay, you can defer these payments, that's fine. So let's take a look at the first column. These are the pieces of information that would have been on their credit file prior to them making that phone call to their lender. So the amount of their previous payment was $1,000. That's how much they were paying. They currently owe $1,000. That's how much they pay every month. We see their payment frequency is monthly. They have no money overdue. They're paid and up to date, and they're not late on any payments. Look what will happen month over month to these values if we don't do something to make sure that they show the deferral correctly. So in month one, so the first month of deferral, their previous payment was $0 because they didn't pay last month. They now owe $2,000, and $1,000 of that is overdue. So they're 30 days late on this account. The next month would be another $1,000. So now they're overdue by $2,000 and they're 60 days late. Now, this wouldn't be accurate if this was what the lender was sending to us, because the lender made a special arrangement with the borrower to say, it's okay to hold off making your payments for whatever period of time that they agreed on, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it was. So we want to make sure that they don't report the data to look like this, because this would tank your credit score. It looks like you're not making any payments. And it's true, you're not making any payments, but they gave you permission to not make any payments. So what we did was we worked very closely with TransUnion and all the lenders in Canada that send us data. And we came up with a set of guidelines for how they need to report this data to us in order to prevent deferred payments like this from affecting people's credit scores. So this is what that looks like. And there are some banks and lenders that told us, we understand that we need to do this, but we don't have the ability to do it in our systems because, of course, the pandemic came without warning and it's unprecedented. And some banks would need a lot of time to update their systems in order to be able to send the credit bureaus the data like this. So for those ones, what we've been doing is we've been helping them make these adjustments to the data before it gets loaded into the credit bureau so that the values get adjusted to what they should be so that the person's credit scores don't get affected. So the first few blue columns here are what we just looked at on the previous page. In the kind of purple-ish red color on the end, this is what the adjustments are in order to prevent negative impact to people. So if you look at the second row that is amount due now, if we hadn't made this change, it would be increasing by $1,000 every month. Now the person owes $2,000. Now they owe $3,000. Well, the specification that we've made is that it has to stay at the original amount, or it could be going down if the person is able to pay more than what they owe. You can also see the scheduled payment amount. Instead of saying $1,000, it says 0, because that is what the expected amount of payment is from the individual, $0. The payment frequency, instead of monthly, it now says deferred. So that's an indicator that this person has an approved deferral. And look at the amount overdue and the number of days late. Those are both being held at 0. So even though they might be reporting the amount overdue is increasing month over month, we're making sure that it's being held as 0. And same thing with the number of days late, because these payments aren't late. Again, this is the agreement that the lender made with the individual. So quick summary, I know that example gets a little bit complicated, but the basic summary here is that we need to make sure this data on deferred payments specifically gets adjusted so that people aren't penalized for being in a deferral payment status with their lenders. And both Equifax and TransUnion are taking exactly the same approach here so that everybody gets treated exactly the same way and consistently and fairly, no matter who you are. In Canada, everybody is going to have the same situation when it comes to deferred payments. There are a few tips here on how to find deferred payments on your own credit report if you do have deferred payments. These are the fields that you want to take a look for and make sure that you're seeing the values that we would expect. It's a little bit complicated because there are a few fields that you need to look for, and it really depends on the format of the credit file that you're looking at. Some of these fields have slightly different names in different formats. There is more information on our website about that as well. So I do have a couple of examples. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly because I do want to make sure we've got some time for questions. So this is what a printed credit file might look like if you got it in the mail. So you can see this example is a mortgage, and see just below the first black box there, it says M1, meaning paid as agreed and up to date. So that's the rating that we were talking about. This is an M instead of an R. The R would have stood for revolving. M stands for mortgage. But the words here, paid as agreed and up to date, that's what you would want to see there, showing that you're not considered to be late. You can see under about the third black box, it says your account is past due in the amount of $0. That's what you want to see, $0 past due. So those are the types of things that you can see on your own credit file in order to confirm that the data is in fact being recorded correctly about the deferred payments. This view is what one of the online versions would look like if you were to get access to your credit file online from Equifax. They are currently available for free. Little bit of inside information. It is possible that they will start charging for them again fairly soon. So if you want to get a look at your online Equifax credit report for free, I would highly recommend doing that very, very soon, like in the next few days. I hope that they don't start charging again. I'm doing what I can to prevent that, but it is possible. You can always get your credit report for free in the mail, and that's what the other view was that we were just looking at. This is what it would look like online. And again, I've identified what some of these fields look like that you would be looking for deferred accounts specifically. As I mentioned, there is more detail about this on the Equifax website. So the first box closer to the top here, this is what the homepage of the Equifax website looks like. This is just equifax.ca. If you look over towards the right side, it's circled in blue. There's a COVID plus Credit Canadian Resource Center. If you click on that, then you will see what you can see in the other box here is some articles that are specific to COVID, deferred payments, and impacts on credit scores and that type of thing. So there is some more information here if you are looking for more resources on that. So I mentioned again, I'll just highlight one more time, you can currently get your credit file online for free. You can always get it through the mail for free, but this is potentially a temporary thing where you can get it for free online. Highly recommend that you do that so that you get that instant information access to your credit report. All right, so we are at the end of our presentation. We're still within the allotted time, so I feel good about that, but I suspect that there are probably about 50,000 questions that have been raised by all of the things that I've attempted to share. So I'll pass it back over to Otis to help us work through some of those questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Julie, for that presentation. And now we'll move on to the questions. Again, just a quick reminder, please post your questions in the Q&A box. We already have a few questions there, so we'll just jump right into those. Someone was asking, what happens if I pay my credit cards earlier than the due date?
Yes. Okay. Oh, and I'm so sorry about that sound issue. I'm not quite sure what it was, but thank you everyone for your patience while we worked through that. There is no negative to paying your credit cards before it's due. You will still get the benefit of the fact that you're using the credit card. And in fact, it can help bring your utilization down, that second highest factor in the score calculation, because you're bringing down the balance of the amount that you owe. So that can actually be a good strategy to use to pay your credit card before it is due.
All right, great. And we do have another one. In your example of applying to credit cards at TD or BMO, I was just wondering how the credit score as seen by different lenders would vary when the characteristics of the algorithm remain the same. Is it because they are accessing the information from different credit bureaus like Equifax and TransUnion?
That's a great question. That's part of it. But even at Equifax, there are multiple scores that are being sold. And this is a bit of a painful analogy that I use, but if you bear with me for a minute. If you were going to buy salad dressing in the store, you wanted, let's say some ranch salad dressing in the grocery store. So you go to your nearest grocery store and go to the salad dressing aisle and you go to where the ranch dressing is, you're gonna see maybe 5 or 6 different options there, different brands. Some of them are gonna be low salt and some of them are going to have more garlic and less of something else in it. But it's all pretty much the same ingredients. It's the same idea with the credit scores that although all of the credit scores have the same ingredients that go into them, there are different weights on some of the different factors that can vary by score. So one example is some credit scores might look more at how many credit cards you have. That might be a bigger factor than another score which looks more at how many installment loans that you have. And that's partly why it's really hard to say that here's the right way to approach it. When I talk about it this way, I know it feels very concerning, like, well, then what's the right number? How many credit cards should I have? And again, I go back to what matters the most is the payment history. That really is the most critical thing, is paying bills on time.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here. Can you clarify if hard inquiries made by the bank during assessment of my credit score for home loans will negatively impact my credit score? And going to multiple banks, will this have a cumulative negative impact?
Another great question. These are really good. So those will all be hard inquiries, because you are applying for credit, even if it's, say, a mortgage and you're shopping around for a good mortgage rate. All of those hard inquiries will land on your credit file. However, a lot of the different scoring algorithms, the different score versions, they give allowance for the fact that this is a normal shopping behavior for mortgages and for car loans. So if you compare that, it's common when people are shopping for a car, if they're looking for a new car and going to dealerships, they might go in the span of a few weeks, they might go to multiple dealerships and find out what kind of loan or lease they'd be able to get there. So they could have many hard hits or hard inquiries landing on their credit file during that time. The same thing is true with mortgage shopping, but that person is only going to buy one car and the mortgage shopper is only going to buy one property. It's different from credit cards, where if somebody applies for 5 different credit cards in a short period of time, they're very likely to end up with the 5 different credit cards if they qualify for them. So for that reason, the algorithms, they use what is a grouping mechanism. So during a certain period of time, and that period of time varies depending on which score version we're talking about. The newer score versions, it's gotten longer and longer because it's normal that people take a while to shop around for a mortgage. So it's typically between 7 and 45 days that you have that any hard inquiries that are similar. So if it's all related to a car shopping, then any hard inquiries within that period, let's call it 45 days, will be grouped together as just one shopping event rather than all of these individual hard inquiries. Same thing, if you happen to be shopping for a car and a mortgage at the same time, that would be 2 shopping events. You would have all of the ones related to cars grouped together, and then all of the ones that are related to mortgages grouped together as 2 separate shopping events. I hope that helps to clarify. So the idea is that you should not be penalized for having a high number of hard inquiries in a short period of time related to shopping around for a mortgage or a car.
Thank you, Julie. So there's another question here about paying more than what is required on a loan or any loan. Does that improve a person's credit rating? So if you've got a set payment, minimum payment, and you pay more, how does it affect your credit rating?
It's a good, that's a good thing to do from a managing your finances perspective to get your debt lower and also probably to incur less interest. So that is helpful that way. As far as a credit score is concerned, I don't think that making an overpayment is really noticed by the credit score. What it's looking for is making at least the payment that you're supposed to be making, so at least the minimum, and ideally the payment in full if we're talking about, say, a credit card. But if you owe $300 and you pay $500, you're probably not going to get extra credit on the score for the fact that you've overpaid. You'll get the full credit for having made the full payment.
Okay, great. Now, one question is about when someone or an organization or a company checks your credit rating, why does that request negatively impact your credit score?
Okay, so quick reminder, it doesn't automatically negatively impact your credit score. It adds a hard inquiry to your credit file, and that can impact your credit score, but it doesn't necessarily impact your credit score. So I'm going to give you an example which will hopefully illustrate it a little bit. Let's say that you and I both have a credit score of 750. So that's a great score, good for us. We're doing pretty well. And let's say that I had an item that had gone into collections and that happened 5 years ago. So I paid it off, but it did go into collections. And so it's still on my credit file. It'll go off in the next year once it reaches the 6-year mark, but it's 5 years old. It's still there on my credit file. But because I have a solid credit history, I've landed at 750 anyway. You don't have anything negative like that on your credit history. We both have 750. Now we're both doing the same thing. We both see a cool new Visa card from Capital One that has really good points that we both want. So we both go and apply for it at the same time. So our credit files didn't look the same before, and they're not going to look the same after, but we are both going to get a new hard inquiry as a result of the fact that we both happened to apply for a credit card at the same time. When we applied for the credit card, we both had a 750. That was what our score was. Now that we each have a new hard inquiry, the next time my score is calculated, my score might go down a bit. So let's say that I go from a 750 to a 740, and your score stays the same, even though you also have a new hard inquiry on your credit file. Why would that happen? Remember when I talked about how credit scores are calculated taking into account all of the different information in a credit file at the time the score is calculated? One of the pieces of information that was on my credit file was this item that was in collections from 5 years ago. Statistically, perhaps our analysis has shown when the scores were developed that people who have an item in collections, who have had an item go into collections at some point, tend to be more risky when they take on more credit. So what that would mean is that at the time the scoring algorithm was developed, it may have been found that in the Canadian credit files, people who had something in collections and then had a new hard inquiry appear on their credit file tended to start missing payments. Whereas people who didn't have something in collections and had other characteristics similar to what was in your credit file didn't start to miss payments once this new hard inquiry appeared on the credit file. So that's why you and I are going to have a different experience. My score went down and yours didn't. And it really is that variable depending on the other things that are in your credit file. So a lot of people have this misconception that there's some set number. Every time you apply for new credit, your score goes down by 20 points or something like this. It does not work that way. There is no specific number. We don't all start with a perfect credit score of 900 and then start losing points every time we miss a payment or something like that. That's not how it works. In fact, the way the algorithms are, almost nobody has a 900. The highest credit score in Canada is usually somewhere around like an 870, 867 even. So that's something I try and share with people so they understand, like, don't be striving for a 900. It's almost impossible. And that's okay, because remember when I mentioned earlier, lenders are looking at about a 750 and higher as the highest score. So they don't care if it's a 760 or an 860. Even though there's 100-point difference there, it doesn't make a difference to a lender.
All right, thank you. So if my credit card company gives me credit increases and that I can accept or decline, should I always accept the increase?
Depending on your circumstances, and I know it's annoying that every one of my answers starts with, well, it depends. An increase can help you because it can make your utilization look lower. So let's say that you've got a credit limit of $1,000 and you've got a balance, you usually use about $500 on it every month, and then you pay it off. So now they offer you a credit limit of $2,000. Now your utilization has just gone from 50% to 25% because the credit limit has gone up. So that can help you if you're confident that you can have that extra utilization or that extra room on the credit card without necessarily using it. And again, I'm not saying that it's the wrong thing to do to use your available credit, especially if you need it. There are some people who can handle those things really well, and they can see loan applications that say, oh, we'll put $10,000 in your bank account by tomorrow morning if you click here and agree to this very high interest rate. Some people can see that and move past it and they don't care. And other people see that and they know they shouldn't sign up for it, but that money would be really nice right now and I could use some new things. So a lot of it has to do with you and how you manage your finances and what you're comfortable with.
Okay, great. Once I have paid an old past due account in full, What will that look like on my credit report? Will it be deleted or just updated saying paid in full?
It'll be updated saying paid in full, and then it will take 6 years for that to drop off the credit file, like any account.
Now, there's a question about so-called credit repair agencies. Can someone actually repair your credit if it's not good?
No. I'm so glad that you asked that. This is something that I find personally just heartbreaking and incredibly frustrating that these agencies exist. There are a few things that are really important to know. One is that nobody can interact with a credit bureau on your behalf unless they have legal power of attorney from you. So there are these credit repair agencies which say, we'll contact Equifax or TransUnion and we'll get these things removed from your credit file. Well, they can't. They cannot contact us on your behalf. The first thing they will be asked for is, where is the power of attorney that allows you to contact us on behalf of this individual? The second thing is that things which are accurate do not get removed from credit files. It does happen that things are inaccurate. Sometimes there is a reporting error. There are a few different conditions that can cause that to happen. So when we find out about it, we fix it for free, and so does TransUnion. You don't have to pay to get things that are errors removed from your credit file. So you can contact the bureau for free and get something corrected. Now, there are a lot of people who call up and they say, well, I've paid this thing that was in collections. I paid it last month. So why is it still on my credit file? It's wrong. You need to take it off. Well, that's a misunderstanding, because something that's in collections, even once it's been paid, it's going to still stay on the credit file for the 6 years from the time it went into collections, not 6 years from the time that it's paid. So it's not prolonging the amount of time it'll stay on the credit file, but it will remain on the credit file for some period of time. So sometimes these credit repair agencies are taking advantage of people's hope and desire to get some of that negative stuff off a credit file. And so they will pay for this kind of thing. So I also find, and as you probably know, there are a lot of legitimate credit counseling agencies out there. And they will often offer advice for free or at a low administrative cost to help people make a budget or help them make a decision about whether they should try and get a consolidation loan or take a different course of action depending on their circumstances. And the reality is that it takes a long time. It can take a while to build up credit. And if you've got something negative like a bankruptcy or several items in collections, it can take a while for your credit score to recover from that. So as it gets older and older, into that 6 years, it's not going to pull your score down quite as much. So an item in collections from last year is worse for your credit score than an item that was in collections 4 years ago and is closer to falling off the credit file. In isolation though, if you're continuing to miss payments and things, then you're gonna have trouble regardless. But trying to make an apples to apples comparison there, an older item in collections has less of an effect than a more recent item in collections. And here's something that we see time and time again. People go to a credit counselor, they get this advice that they don't really like, which is, yeah, it's gonna take a while. You do owe this money, so you do need to pay it off. So it will take a while. We can take a look at your budget and we can try and come up with a strategy to help you do that. Well, a lot of people, that's not the message people are hoping for. They're looking for, oh yeah, here's the quick fix. You can get this thing removed from your history and then you don't have to pay it. So that'll be great. So it's not quite what they're hoping to hear from the free credit counseling agency, but they see this ad online that tells them that if they pay $300, their credit score will go up by 150 points within a month. that's a pretty appealing thing to do. And the ad is all like shiny and nice and bright colors. And the free credit counseling offices might not be quite as exciting looking because they're not for profits. And so it's not this like shiny, great, super wonderful experience, except that people are very nice and knowledgeable. So we see this happen where people walk out of the credit counseling office and then they pay the money to these credit repair companies, hoping that this is going to be the quick fix and that they found something better than what the credit repair or the credit counselor rather was offering. And then the person ends up in an even worse situation because now they owe another $300 and it didn't do anything. They didn't get any benefit. So I know that I've gone on for a while in answer to that question. As you can tell, it's something that I feel quite strongly about.
Thank you, Julie. That was great. Does multiple credit card use within a month have any negative effect on a credit score? And also a second part of the question is, what is the effect of having multiple credit cards in general?
It's one of those situations where the longer and more solid your credit history is, the smaller an effect it's going to have. So if you already have multiple credit cards, then it's fine. Use them. The fact of whether you're just using one or whether you're using all three that you have or all five or whatever, the score is already taking into account the fact that you have these, whatever the number is of open credit card accounts. So if you already have them, it's okay to use them or not use them. If you're thinking about opening more credit card accounts, then that's where I would say, if you are relatively new to Canada, so you've got a pretty short credit history, I would balance that out with the need to open the new credit card. What a lot of people do is they start with a secured credit card, which you have to put a deposit down on. And once they build up enough of a credit history, then they want to move into a non-secured credit card, which is often a higher credit limit and has better terms. That's okay. I'm not suggesting to not do that. Like, that's a legitimate thing to do if that's the right move for you in your financial circumstances. But maybe don't apply for 4 credit cards when you're moving away from the secured credit card, because you have a pretty short credit history at that point, and maybe you've made every payment on time and in full, and that's perfect. That's what you should do. But you're still in that kind of smaller boat because you're still building up your proof that you're a good user of credit, that you're responsible with your credit. So by opening 3 or 4 new credit cards in a short period of time, that's more of a wave that's going to hit your boat, and you're in that smaller boat because you're still building up your credit history. So it might have more of a negative impact. Otis, you're still on mute if you are asking another question.
Sorry about that. So there's a question here about what impacts credit scores the most?
Payment history. So that is, having missed or late payments is the most impactful thing. Now, in terms of points, like, it's so complicated. There's no formula like, if you declare bankruptcy, then you'll lose X number of points. But if you do this, then you'll lose that many points. As I've been saying with the other examples, it really does depend on the other information in your credit file at the time the score is calculated. So declaring bankruptcy is a pretty negative thing to do from a credit management perspective. You're basically saying, like, I can't do this, I can't pay my accounts. Well, you're not going to have a credit score that makes it possible for you to go and get new credit anytime soon, because you've just declared, I cannot handle credit at this time. So in terms of like the biggest impact on a credit score would be a really major move like declaring bankruptcy. But hopefully that's not something that most people need to consider. And when it comes to day-to-day, just making your financial decisions, the most important thing is pay what you owe and pay it on time. So one example I would give is if you've got a credit card and you have a minimum payment of $10 that is due tomorrow, but you know you're going to get paid next week and you would be able to pay off the whole $300 balance if you wait until next week. What I would do is at least make the minimum payment of the $10 before tomorrow. That's when it's due. And then pay the rest of it off when you can. But it's better to at least make the minimum payment before it's due than to pay the whole thing, but late. Because what you're agreeing to when you sign up for a credit card is to make that minimum payment on time.
Okay, great. Does having a good credit score guarantee that someone will be approved for credit or any other type of loan or financial products?
Another great question. It does not guarantee that you would be approved. And there are a few reasons for that. A lot of lenders wouldn't use just a credit score as their only criteria to make a decision on whether or not to lend to somebody, especially for something like a mortgage, which is a bigger amount typically. So it's a bigger risk for the lender to loan out a mortgage. So they often have a lot of different factors that go into their overall decision, not just whether or not they'll loan to you, but also at what terms. So what interest rate might you get? Or if it's a credit card, what your initial credit limit is going to be on that credit card. So having a good credit score is a really good, important aspect, but they often also look at employment status and income, and depending on what the loan is or what the type of credit account is, they might look at other things too, like bank account balances or what your holdings are. And as we discussed earlier, that information is not available in your credit file and therefore not part of the credit score.
Okay. And there's a question here about, you mentioned in the presentation that there is an impact of hard checks on the credit score in terms of losing some points. What is the range of points that one can lose for hard checks?
I actually don't have an answer for that. We walked through an example earlier where you may or may not see a change in a credit score with a new hard inquiry. But it really does depend on the other information that's in your credit file at the time that the score is calculated. And I honestly have never been able to find, and I haven't seen in my travels, any kind of reference for like, this is the typical range of points that you might see somebody's score change if they take a particular action, whether it's applying for new credit, so a new hard hit, or something else.
Okay, and we have one about a delinquent tenant who gets a ruling from the landlord and tenant board for non-payment of rent. Will it be placed on their credit file?
Oh, that's a good question. So the answer would depend on whether the landlord and tenant board is a reporter of data to the bureaus. And I don't know offhand whether that counts as like a court to be reporting legal judgments. So I'll have to take that one away, and maybe Otis, I can get the answer back to you or address
Sure.
it if we end up doing another one of these.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll have a couple more questions. Julie has been gracious enough to stay on, and to thank you all, everyone, for being patient with us. Julie will likely be coming back again to address this, some other areas of this topic. So there's a question here about what happens if I close off a credit card, one of my credit cards that I have.
Yeah, that's a common one. Unfortunately, it's another one where I don't have a solid, like, definitely do this or definitely don't do that kind of answer for. But here are a couple of things that you should be aware of. one of the factors that goes into the credit score calculation, we saw this on one of the slides in the presentation, is the credit history, the length of credit history, and also the length of time that accounts have been open. So there are some of the calculations are things like average age of accounts, average age of open accounts. So if I have, let's say I've got an old Visa card that I've been using for 10 years, and then I've got a new one that I got in the last 2 years. So my average age of accounts is probably going to be sitting somewhere around like 6 years or something like that. Then I close the 10-year-old card. That data will still be there for a while. It's still sitting on my credit file for 6 years. So it'll probably still get taken into account for the next 6 years, but then I'm going to get to a point where it's no longer part of the calculation. So I'm no longer getting the benefit of the fact that I've had this credit card open for 10 years that is bumping up my average age of accounts. So it is a bit of a balance. On the other hand, in the example of somebody who's got a secured card, they're new to Canada or starting out in Canada, and they're you have to put a deposit down for the secured card, and maybe you need the deposit back once you can qualify for another card. So you have to close that account in order to get the deposit back. Then that's something that you need to do. In the short term, it may have a bit of a negative effect. It may not, depending on the other factors in your credit report. So the best I can do for general advice is, if you've got an old card that you're not using and you're wondering whether to close it, but it's not causing you any problems, then I'd consider keeping it open just to help with that overall calculation. But if we're talking about somebody who's got a credit file that's been open for 15 years and they've got a long, solid credit history, then I wouldn't be that worried about it, even if it is your oldest credit card that's been open. Again, back to my clumsy small boat, large boat analogy, your credit score can weather a lot more once it's got that longer, solid history behind it.
Okay, there is one question here about payday loans and their implications on credit. Can you speak to that?
As far as I know, there is nothing from a credit scoring standpoint. There's nothing negative about the fact that it's a payday loan. I don't think that there is a category for payday loans, so you aren't necessarily getting dinged or having a negative impact for the fact that you have a negative or a payday loan. I would definitely caution that from a personal finance perspective, payday loans can be very, very, very difficult to emerge from. The interest rates can be so high, and it can become a very difficult spiral for people. So I wouldn't, in general, recommend going into a payday loan for anybody who is able to avoid it. Also, I know that there has been some work with the credit bureaus looking at payday loan data, so it's possible that it'll change. So what I'm saying now about it not necessarily being negative, that may end up changing over time.
Okay, and one last question about collection agencies. When negotiating with collection agencies, what are key things to keep in mind, and what is the implications of that process on the credit files?
So an item in collections has to be removed from the credit file after 6 years after the time that the item went into a collection status, not 6 years after the time that that particular collection agency received the item. So one thing that can happen is accounts can get moved around between collection agencies, and they don't all do this, but some of them do things that are unfair to consumers, where they basically try to reset the clock on the item, and they claim that, like, well, we just got it, so like the effective date of this thing is today. So that's why, you know, we need to reset that 6-year timer on this. The thing is that when that data comes into the credit bureau, we don't have a way of knowing whether that is accurate or not. The only way that we're going to know that they're doing something they shouldn't be doing is by you calling the credit bureau and saying, I've got an item in collections from 7 years ago that is sitting on my credit file. I don't think it should be there. This does happen. And what we do is we then go back to the collections agency and say, you have to stop reporting this. What you're doing is not allowed within the rules because this thing went into collections more than 6 years ago. Therefore, it cannot be on this individual's credit file. And again, this isn't all collection agencies. A lot of them do play by the rules, but there are a few that try to get around these things, and they will make threats to people like, this is never going to come off your credit report, or it's always going to affect your so you should be aware that no, that cannot happen. Legally, it cannot always affect your credit standing, and it does happen that people need to call us more than once. So we tell a collections agency, stop reporting this item. They then report it back again the next month. So it appears back on the person's credit file. So then they call us back again and say, I thought this got taken off. And then we say, it did. They must have sent it back to us again. So we'll call them again. And we do make threats to them sometimes where we'll tell them that we're not going to allow them to continue reporting to us if they continue doing things like that, which are not allowed. So it's important to be aware of what their limitations are too, because again, not all collections agencies do this kind of thing, but some of them do try to threaten things to consumers, which they're not allowed to do.
Well, on that note, we'll come to the end of our Q&A. I know there's always a lot of questions that we can go on and on trying to answer, but we have answered the majority of those questions. So thank you so much, Julie, for your time. And right now, we're just going to wrap up. And so as you can see, you can connect with Julie on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. So feel free to do that because you can engage with her and see what information she posts, as well as be able to ask anything directly to her, and she'll be able to provide you with the information. I know there was a question about the link to Equifax's, the link to the free report that you mentioned. I think people were trying to access that. So if you're able to share that, I can share it with everybody following the presentation.
Sure, it is in the presentation, so you can pull it from that one slide that it's in there. I just want to highlight what you can get for free is the credit report, not the credit score. Those are two different things. So you will see it says if you want the credit score, click here and you have to pay some amount. So don't do that unless you want to pay for it, but there are other places you could get the credit score for free. It's the credit report itself that you should be able to get for free.
Thank you, Julie, for clarifying that. And again, we'll be sharing a copy of the presentation, so you'll be able to get access to that link. So just to wrap up, you will be receiving an evaluation for this webinar. Please feel free, we invite you to share, to complete that so that we can get your feedback, and this will help us plan future sessions. For all upcoming events and recordings, you'll be able to see that on our website at accessccf.com. So feel free to connect with us and to follow up with us. We appreciate your time and your patience as well as we navigated through the technical issues of the sound. So I thank you so much to Julie for her time, and thank you all for attending, and stay tuned. We'll have Julie back again at some point to discuss different aspects of this interesting topic. So don't despair that you didn't get to ask a question. So we'll have Julie back not too long after this. So thank you so much. I wish everybody a great day and stay safe. And thank you for attending and being with us today.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Bye.
you, Julie. Bye, everybody.